everybody, today I'm going to do my December reading wrap up. So my last reading wrap up of 2019 and of the decade actually. In December I managed to read a total of 12 books, so the final month of 2019 was definitely a good reading month for me. I read some new favorites, I also read some books that I was less impressed with. Overall, I think it was a really good ending of like my reading year. And I think you all know by now what a wrap up is. So, you know, let's just get started. And then I'm going to tell you all about the books that I read in December. The first book that I finished was a Dutch book by a Dutch author. And it's called Maar je ziet er helemaal niet autistisch uit by Bianca Toeps. Which would translate as But you don't look autistic at all. This is written by a girl who is autistic. And she writes about her experience with that. How people often say to her that she doesn't look autistic at all, how there are different kinds and different ways of being autistic, and she has interviews with other people and it's very informative. It was quite a quick read, this one. I was really interested in it. I love the writing style overall. What I didn't like as much is that often the chapters ended very abruptly. Like, I felt like the chapter was building up and then suddenly it was over and we were on to the next chapter, which wasn't really my thing overall. But apart from that, it is very informative, very interesting as I said, and I would definitely recommend it if you are Dutch and you want to learn more about being autistic. Then the next book that I read was Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. This is a fantasy novel. It's about a man named Richard who one day helps this weird but wounded girl who is lying in the street, and after that he has this very weird experience where nobody recognizes him anymore, and he just feels like suddenly he doesn't exist anymore. And then he's thrown into the world of London below, where there's a lot going on and there are some assassins that are going after him and everything. It's quite a interesting, weird adventure. I listened to the audiobook, which is narrated by Neil Gaiman himself, which is quite funny, I have to admit. Overall, definitely with the first half, this book wasn't really doing it for me. It was okay, but I just thought it was maybe a bit too weird and whimsical for my taste. And then after that, I have to admit that the book is sort of well put together. The things are clever, they take certain things around London with names very literally, and I do love the fantasy aspect of it. But I think in general this one is just not really the book for me. It's okay, but I feel like I can definitely see why some people would really love it, but I'm just not one of those people. And I gave Neverwhere 3 out of 5 stars. And I forgot to mention, I gave Maar je ziet er helemaal niet autistisch uit 4 out of 5 stars. Then my next read was one that I was very excited about, and it is The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. Yes, I did it. I finally finished it. Miracles do still happen. And I really loved it. So this one has been on my TBR for so long. I've talked about it for so long. In December I finally finished it, and yeah, I have a lot of thoughts. This is a fantasy novel, the first one in the Mistborn trilogy. It's about this fantasy land where there is an evil, dark lord ruler. The magic system is based on metals. Most people can use one sort of metal, but there are some people who can use all these sorts of metals, and they are called Mistborn. That's sort of the idea of this series and this world. I read it and I absolutely loved it. The world building was amazing, the writing was amazing, all the characters were amazing. The story was so intense and epic, and it was definitely a roller coaster, an adventure. There are slower parts, there are action-packed parts. I was intimidated by it at first, but overall it wasn't too bad with how difficult it is to get through. It is long, but overall, you know, it's not that hard. The story is actually quite easy to get into once you really get the hang of it. I talk more about it in my favorite books of 2019 video, but overall, The Final Empire was amazing. I cannot wait to pick up the next books in the series. I cannot wait to see what's going to happen next. It was just wow. And I think I can definitely say by now that I really love Brandon Sanderson as a writer, and I just really loved this book. Then after that I did a reread, and it was a reread of The Great Alone by Kristen Hanna. I listened to the audiobook with this one. It's a historical fiction novel. It takes place mostly during the 1970s. It's about a girl named Lenny, and she and her parents moved to Alaska to live in the Great Alone and just live off the land and live quite a primitive life. And then the book is also about a longer period of time, and yeah, there's a lot happening. Overall, yeah, this is one that I really love because, as I mentioned, I read it before. I really love Kristen Hanna, in case you don't know. My favorite book by hers is The Nightingale, but my second favorite is The Great Alone. This book is so beautifully atmospheric. I just love it. The way Alaska is described and the surroundings and the land, it sounds so beautiful and so amazing and just gorgeous. And also about how brutal Alaska can be and how dangerous it is in the winter. And I loved Lainey, and it's such an amazing read. And I have to say, at the end it feels a bit more like it turns into a soap series, if that makes sense. I'm not the biggest fan of the final quarter of the book. It's still good, but not as amazing as the beginning. But yeah, mostly, you know, top points for the atmosphere and the writing, and it just all sounds so beautiful to me. And I gave The Great Alone 4 out of 5 stars, and The Final Empire 5 out of 5 stars. Whoa, I'm really forgetful today with giving out stars. Then my next one was also a reread, and it was Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng. This book is about a family, and the daughter Lydia is dead at the beginning of the book. You're told that she's dead at the very first sentence. And then the rest of the book goes back and forth between the past and the present, where her family doesn't know how she died and what happened with her. And it's also about family expectations. And overall, this book is quite sad, but I really do love it because it's so beautiful and it really sort of hits you, because it's about a lot of real life issues and topics, and it's amazingly written. I loved it so much the first time that I read it. I think it's now 3 years ago. This time around I listened to the audiobook, which is also really good. And yeah, as I said, it's quite sad and sometimes depressive. I wouldn't read this book if you want something uplifting, because it's definitely not that. But it is very real and raw, and I really love Celeste Ng as a writer, and it was so nice to read an old favorite this month. So Everything I Never Told You is definitely a 5-star read for me. I still love it, and yeah, I'm happy that I read it again. My next book that I read was One Day in December by Josie Silver. This is a romance novel. The book is about a girl named Lori who one day at the bus station sees this guy, and they lock eyes and they instantly feel this connection, but then the bus where she is sitting in drives away and she cannot find him again. Until 1 year later, where her best friend Sarah introduces the busboy as her new boyfriend and the new love of her life. Then the rest of the book takes place over the span of 10 years. A lot of them are during December and during Christmas, but not all of them. So I read this book because it is fitting to read during the Christmas season, but it's not necessarily a Christmas book. You can read it any time of the year. And I thought this book was definitely very, very cute. I wanted to read it because I had read a lot of fantasy and bigger books before this. So I wanted something lighter, something sweeter. And One Day in December was definitely that. It was an interesting concept. It reminded me a bit of One Day by David Nichols, but I liked One Day in December way more. This one was way better. Sometimes it does feel a bit fast because, of course, it's over the span of 10 years. But it's only not a very big book, so sometimes things feel a bit rushed, but it's also somehow nice to have things, you know, just happen instead of waiting and waiting. Although there's still a lot of waiting in this book in other things, but yeah, I would just say if you want to read a cute, sweet book with also some emotional parts, then One Day in December is definitely the book for you. And again, you can read it during Christmas time, but also after that, because it's not necessarily a, you know, definitive Christmas book, but it is very fitting for the season. And then another romance novel that I read is The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren, but this one I listened to the audiobook. And this one is about a girl named Olive, and her sister gets married, but then everyone at the wedding gets food poisoning apart from Olive herself and the brother of the groom. And then there's this honeymoon and they go on it together, but they really hate each other, so I guess you can sort of guess where this plot is going. They end up starting to like each other more than they had initially expected. Again, this is quite a cute read. I did like One Day December better, I think, but The Unhoneymooners is also, you know, fun and relaxing and nothing too serious. I will say though, with the romance plot of this, there was definitely chemistry, so I definitely felt that. Which is important. But apart from that, I thought the novel was nothing too special, nothing too interesting, quite predictable. And it was okay. Definitely a nice audiobook to listen to, but you know, just overall okay. And I gave the Honeymooner, the Unhoneymooners 3 out of 5 stars, and One Day in December 4 out of 5 stars. Did I mention that? Oh my god, I'm getting so confused this wrap up. After that, I read The Queen of Nothing by Holly Black, the third and final book in the Cruel Prince series, or the Folk of the Air series. And this series is about a mortal girl named Jude who grows up in the land of fairy where everything is not as it seems, and there's this cruel prince named Carden, and this is the third book, so of course the story has progressed a lot since then, but I'm not going to spoil anything. A very highly anticipated release of a lot of people, myself included. I think like the Cruel Prince series is such nice YA fluff. Nothing too special, but very enjoyable. But unfortunately I have to say that the Cruel Prince, or like The Queen of Nothing, was quite disappointing. It really wasn't that interesting overall. I had quite some trouble getting through it. It was overall a lot more boring, a lot more slow. I felt like it was more of like the final chapter of a book than a book on its own. There were some good scenes, definitely. There were definitely some things that I enjoyed, but overall, just, I don't know, I wasn't really feeling it. Also not in the casual YA fluff sense. I just liked The Cruel Prince and The Wicked King way more. And I gave it like 2.5 out of 5 stars. It was okay, like a lot of things were still the same, but just the plot really wasn't grabbing me, and it was more boring and more slow and just not really doing it for me. I also read The Afterlife of Holly Chase by Cynthia Han. This is a retelling of A Christmas Carol. So perfect to read during December, during Christmas time. And it's also a reread because I read it for the first time last year. The Afterlife of Holly Chase is about a girl named Holly Chase. She is a modern day Scrooge. She's very mean. She's your typical LA spoiled rich girl. She's never nice to other people. Then on the night before Christmas, she gets visited by the ghosts of Christmas past, present and future. But Holly doesn't change her ways, and she ends up dying shortly after, and then in her afterlife she is recruited as the new ghost of Christmas past. As I said, this is a reread. I already read it last year and I really enjoyed it. This is such a cute, fun Christmas read. It is so cleverly done and so interesting to read a modern spin on an old story, and it definitely has the Christmas atmosphere and the Christmas spirit, you know. It takes this story and, you know, makes it more modern, and I do love Holly because she's definitely very insufferable at the beginning, but then we get to know her a bit better and some like more of her backstory, and it's just a perfect Christmas read for me. I would think I will read this every Christmas because it's definitely something that will put you in the right Christmas mood. Not a brilliant book or anything, but very fun, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Then my next book was another audiobook. It was Final Girls by Riley Sager. This book is about a girl named Quincy. She's one of the famous final girls. Together with her and Samantha and Lisa, they all survived something horrible as the sole survivor. So they are called Final Girls, as with like horror movies, the last girl standing. But then one of them, Lisa, ends up dying, and then Quincy and the other one, Samantha, get closer together, and something is not exactly as it seems. This book overall was okay. I did like the premise of like final girls, and there were definitely some horrific backstories, but overall it was also quite boring. I felt like for much of it nothing was happening, and the most interesting parts were the flashbacks of Quincy and her original, you know, murder, tragic backstory with all her friends being murdered. But in the present, it was kind of, yeah, it wasn't really taking off. There were some twists and turns, but that didn't really save the book for me at all. Again, it was okay, it was enjoyable. It's not too long, of course, so that sort of makes it okay, but still, again, boring. I just think with this premise, which is so interesting, you could have been a lot more exciting and there could have been a lot more going on, and I felt like this book missed its opportunity, and I just gave it 4 out of 5 stars, or 3 out of 5 stars, sorry. For my next one, I'm almost done, but I also read the Huntress by Kate Quinn, which I said I wouldn't read anymore in 2019, but surprise, I ended up doing it anyway. This is a book that mostly takes place after World War II. It's told from different perspectives, in different periods of time, but the main goal is to find a woman called the Huntress, who was a Nazi war criminal. There's also a girl named Nina who was a war pilot in the Russian army in this group called the Night Witches, so there's also that, and there's multiple different stories going on. Of course I read this because I love the Alice Network by Kate Quinn so much, so I had to read this one as well. And yeah, the Huntress was really good as well. Loved it again, so many amazing characters and they all feel so real and you're really drawn to them, and the writing is amazing and the story is so interesting. And I didn't know about like the night witches and the female air pilots in the Russian army. Just so many things that I've learned from it. I will say though, the Huntress was a bit slower than was necessary. It takes a bit more time to get invested into the story. It's less binge-worthy than the Alice Network is, in my opinion. Especially at the beginning, I wasn't just completely grabbed by it straight away, but once you invest a bit of time in it, it's definitely beautiful and interesting and everything that I want it to be. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. It's still amazing, just not as amazing as the Night Circus, but still definitely something I would recommend if you're looking for a good historical fiction novel. And then my last read of 2019 was I Was Born for This by Alice Oseman. And this book revolves around a boy band called The Ark. There's this girl Angel who is very much in the fandom of this boy band, and then there's also Jimmy who is part of the band. Things are happening, it's about fandom and the pressure of fame, and their sort of, you know, stories intertwine. This is again one that I listened to on audiobook, and this is again one that I thought was okay. You know, it's interesting, definitely the parts about fandom and meeting online friends, which is of course something I'm very much interested in because I also sort of, you know, am part of an online community, so that is something that is nice to read about. But it also wasn't massively interesting, or I don't know, maybe just not really my cup of tea. I'm not the biggest contemporary fan, and this one just didn't really do it completely for me. I also wasn't sure about all the characters. They were okay, but yeah, I didn't feel it completely. I think that's the main thing that I want to say about it. And I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. You know, it was okay, not bad, but not great either. And that was it then for my last wrap up of 2019. That was again a long one, but I read a lot of books and I'm very happy with it. I cannot wait for all my new wrap ups in 2020. I hope it will be an amazing reading year as well. But for now, this was it for this video. And if you like this video, please go subscribe or maybe give it a thumbs up, because as always, I would really appreciate that. And then hopefully I will see you again very soon in my next video. Bye!